What's up, guys? Ben here, bringing you another video today. We're continuing our CDL 2023 season preview series. We're going to talk about two franchises that have gone over huge changes in the offseason. I think they're both sort of in the beginning of a rebuilding phase, and they've taken kind of slightly different paths to get there. I'm talking about the Seattle Surge and the LA Thieves. We're going to start with LA Thieves and talk about their season last year. The big changes, obviously, I just alluded to, they had in the offseason, and kind of how I think the team might net this season. I think off the rip, just as a general thought, I think for both teams, I think this is a rebuilding year. I think you might see some success, but I think the more key thing is these teams are thinking a little bit more long-term and trying to find cornerstone talent for the teams that they have had recently, which, you know, they both had teams that won championships, and now those players are gone. So let's start with LA Thieves and see what they got cooking up this season. So after a very interesting year in Vanguard for LA Thieves, in which they were almost looking like they were going to break up in the middle of the season, they ended up making a huge run at the end of the year, being the best team and winning Call of Duty champs. So obviously they were going to run it back for the Modern Warfare 2 year. And at Raleigh, they were it was clear that their S&D, things that they had solved were starting to come back again in their game. And they worked hard on that after Major 1, a lot of trial and error. And then they made a really good run at Major 2 to losers bracket after not a great start to that tournament, just losing to Atlanta FaZe, really on a CDL Control and a CDL Search. The Optic event was a little bit of a mess for them. The whole split was kind of a little bit of a mess for them, but they, again, as a professional team, rebounded well, and they came in a Major 4 hot, beat Optic, and went ahead and won that Columbus event. And you start to think, well, if these can be this good at Search, this good at Control, they've got to go hardpoint game, because you know these guys are organized. They might do it again. Unfortunately, they just never seemed to catch that same fire. At Toronto, they were a non-factor. And then they got out super early at champs, not making it to the weekend. And I think at that point, with sort of all of the players not having signed new contracts, this was a consideration from LA Thieves management. With them getting out early after champs, there was a lot of rumors starting to happen that weekend that this might be kind of the end of this LA Thieves team that we had seen go through a lot of trial and tribulations. And they may be losing a few players to some of the other top squads and be in a rebuild situation. So the fun fact is not a single member of this roster is returning to LA Thieves. Draza, we talked about in a previous video, is off to Atlanta FaZe. Kenny, off to Optic Texas. Octane, now one of my co-hosts on The Flank, he's retired. And Envoy is over in Toronto. We've talked about the 3 out of 4 here. And I guess we talked a little bit about Sam. I don't know. You see him all the time streaming, so we don't really talk much about that. Other than to say that he had a great career, and it's tough that he didn't, you know, end it with like a walk into the sunset type deal, but he was on good teams the last couple of years. So you got a tip that. So LA Thieves, completely new team. They bring over Dan Ghosty, free agency from Optic Texas. They bring over Cammy and Afro, free agents from the disappointing Minnesota Rocker team last year. And they bring over Joe Deceives from Los Angeles Guerrillas, who had a lot of promise last season. But obviously the LAG team was... I could tell you how I feel about it, but I don't want to have to censor myself in this video, so we'll just leave it to the imagination. So let's talk about where the Thieves team kind of netted last year. I don't want to spend too much time talking about it because they have a completely different roster, but I do want to spend a lot of time as how I think this team will do this season. So, like, again, don't want to spend too much time because none of these players are returning, but Thieves last year were pretty solid by the end of the season across all game modes. They were good at Control, good at Hardpoint. The 51% win rate in S&D is really interesting. This is kind of the stat I want to talk about the most. And I think one thing I'll be looking forward to see if this Thieves new version of this roster can fix, which was this kind of issue right here, which was even by the end of this season, they were still one of the worst teams at converting their 4v3s into wins. This was a big issue that plagued them in the beginning of Vanguard, and they finally fixed it at the end of that year. And they had the same problem at the beginning of this year, and they kind of fixed it at the end of the year. But there's never been like an elite team at like winning their man up, man down percentages. And unfortunately at this level, if you throw away search rounds, you're going to make it hard to win some of these maps. Like case in point, 67%, even with the event when they had this season, they still finished dead last first blood win percentage on offense. I mean, we can go look at the Asilo stats. The Asilo stats are, if I scroll down here, basically, we'll take this to another level. 66% first blood win percentage, even though they get 55% of first bloods on the map. So they're top like 4 in first blood percentage, but they're not winning them at an elite level, and that map is tough. And then the offensive ones are 46% first blood percentage, mid pack, but winning 63% is by far It's actually the second worst. The only team that was worse was Boston at 53%. Just not going to cut it if you want to be an elite team. And that was sort of, I think, the issue they were never able to solve last season. But you kind of see these two splits, I think, really kind of encapsulate the point. I mean, stage 4, they came in, they only lost one series, the entire split, and they were elite every single game mode. There were obviously maps they, didn't really play, which is fine. They'd never really played Mercado SND all year. They hated that map, but they were like deep at every map in hardpoint, and that kind of really helped win that event. But you see then, once they sort of regress towards the mean a little, where their sort of win conditions start to slide. And again, they actually did play a Mercado and win it in stage 5. It's actually kind of interesting, but as we go and take a look and scroll over to champs, you see that once they couldn't win Embassy, which is a backbone map for them, they really struggled to get it going because they didn't really play this map. So what do I think about Thieves and sort of the moves that they have made? Role wise, I think the moves make a lot of sense to me. You're basically going to have Joe Deceives and Afro, who are generally full-time sub players, be your aggressive subs. What I kind of like is that Joe is so raw that I think they might be able to kind of put Marcus, aka Afro, in a little bit more of a advantageous spot for his play style, which can be aggressive, can't be a bulldozer, but he can also take routes when he wants to. I think the issue is sometimes the hesitancy on that, and he ends up kind of inadvertently sort of mega baiting his team. I think they can do a good job of kind of building a good system around sort of Marcus's strengths there. And Joe is very malleable again, because I think he really did do a lot of development in the LAG season because of all of their issues. And we'll get to that probably in the last video in this series. So I think there's a lot they can do there. The ARs are interesting on this team. Dan, I think, is going to be sort of their more aggressive of the two AR players. And we're going to finally get to see Dan play the role that he played in Challengers, which is he doesn't really need to be mega hill kit low in this game. You play like a Skid Row, your AR is going to be up top on P2. Like, you may just end up getting a lot of hill time just because that's how it goes. I do think that Cam will be a little bit more of the slower AR player, which I think will kind of benefit his playstyle. So I think for Thieves, the roles make a lot of sense. The only kind of things with this Thieves team is that there are a lot of questions here. Cammy and Afro did not have good seasons on the Minnesota Rocker. Afro especially disappointing and then getting benched after how good he looked playing for London all those years. And so can they get that same Afro? Can they get Cold War Cammy? Those are big questions. I don't know if those players are still kind of in that spot. And maybe they have a comeback here, or maybe, it doesn't work out. Joe Deceives, will he develop into a good player? I think Joe, if they can figure it out, could be a cornerstone player on this roster for years to come. And Dan Ghosty, I actually think that Dan is kind of under a lot of pressure on this team. I know that might be a little bit of a hot take because he played well for Optic, but just because you played good for one team, if you go to that second team and don't play well, your stock kind of drops. And I think that for Dan, this is a huge season to kind of prove a lot of people wrong, that he was just kind of a one-game wonder, really good on the Optic team. I'm not one of those guys. I actually think Dan's really good. I just want to be clear. I think Dan's going to play great on this team, and what I've seen from him in BPL, what I've seen from him in some limited scrims we've seen them play against some amateur teams, like Dan has looked maybe like the best player on this team. But I do think that Dan has to continue the form that he had on his last team. So I think for LA Thieves, I don't think they're going to answer all these questions, and my guess is they may make a roster change or two this season. But I think the goal for Thieves is by the end of the season, they have two guys ideally that are going to be center place players for next season, and then they can decide if they want to really up the spending and kind of get to the next level as far as supporting a championship team. We'll see if that's what Thieves wants to do. All right, so let's take a look at LA Thieves' kind of starting schedule, and I'll give you some of my final thoughts. So they actually start off with a big match, second match on Friday between them and Seattle. I actually think this one is very 50-50. I actually think the books kind of have Thieves as the favorite in this one, which I think might not be super accurate. It is early in the season, so there might be some value there if you are a better to take the Seattle side of this matchup. The next matchup will be against Atlanta FaZe, and that's on a tough one. So for LA Thieves, as much praise as I've given them, like, there is a good chance they start 0-2 here. And it might be 0-3 because Boston's not going to be an easy out. And then they got a final match against LAG before the break I think is winnable. So there's a world where LA Thieves come out 1-3 here. There's also a world where they come out like 2-2. To go undefeated, I think I'd be very surprised they do it. But there are some tough matches here. And then it doesn't get any easier. They play Toronto, New York, and Carolina. So I actually think that Thieves have gotten one of the hardest schedules in this split. And I do think, unfortunately for Thieves, that they may be a team that starts in losers bracket at this event, because I just see a lot of matchups where they're not favorited. They're playing 3 of the top 4 teams in the league. They're playing a team in Boston and Seattle that are like fringe top 6 teams, along with Thieves. And I think Thieves are going to have to do a lot of work here to really get like a 4-3, 5-2 record to really guarantee winners, and not be in sort of a 3-4 situation where they're hoping that they get into the last couple of spots. We might not see a great Thieves performance in Major 1, I'm going to be honest with y'all. But I kind of believe in the process with this team, and I think that at some point this season they will be a factor. I'm not worried about them not qualifying for champs, but I just don't see this team on paper being an elite team as constructed. I don't see them, on paper being better or beating, 6 out of 10 times against FaZe or Toronto or like that. So I do think Thieves are going to be a little bit like what we've seen with Boston last couple of seasons. I think they're going to be, when they're going, like a pretty hard team to beat online. At LAN, it's going to be a little bit iffy, and I think they'll compete with the mid-pack. But unfortunately, I see this team's kind of ceiling being, top 4, maybe making a losers final. I would be hard pressed with their comp right now to see them, unfortunately, winning a championship or making the grand final right now with how stacked some of the teams are. But hopefully they can, develop a couple of these players and really build towards a good second year project, or second year as part of this rebuild project that they're pulling off. All right, so next up, the other team we'll talk about in this video is the Seattle Surge. This is another team that has basically completely blown up their roster. So Seattle, just like Optic, I think made some questionable roster decisions last year. They obviously had that big win at the Toronto Major in Vanguard, and at the end of the season, they came up just short against Atlanta FaZe in losers finals to get 3rd, and they decided to run it back, and they actually had a pretty good start to the year, making it to and losing to New York in the Major 1 grand finals at Raleigh. But after that, they were a 100% complete non-factor pretty much the entire season. I'm not joking. I mean, they obviously got 4th at champs. They played solid at that event, but they were not in any kind of form where I thought they were going to make it deep. Really, this team was terrible in S&D, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I think the biggest thing is that after that Major 1, there were rumors and real approaches for Pred to join Optic. And I do think, and the players won't admit it, the management won't admit it, the coaches won't admit it, but I do think that aborted move really hurt their chemistry the rest of the year. And I just think they were never in a position to really get ahead of teams. Like, I thought they were very effective at points in Vanguard as far as figuring out the hardpoint meta and sort of how to really utilize the skill of Pred and Sib. So obviously, after a very disappointing Modern Warfare 2 season where they got dead last in Major 2, top 6 at the Optic Major, top 8 in Columbus, and then dead last in Major 5, they really kind of went their separate ways with this team. Management actually got rid of the coaching staff as well on this team. And they have a completely new lineup this season. They have Rambo, who spent most of last season on the Pine after parting ways with Optic. He's going to come in and be the GM coach. And they bring over a couple of other folks from Optic, Illy and Kyler, aka who could come over from that franchise playing there last year. They have RC's coming over from LAG. And my favorite player on the roster, Abuza, who they pick up from Challengers. He played for a Wobble Bobs last year in EU Challengers, and it was probably the #1 prospect coming in. And so that will be their starting for this season. Now, again, because there's been major changes here, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but you see that last year that Seattle team was a solid 500 team in Respawn, but they were horrific at search. I mean, truly, like, there were obviously more worse teams in S&D, like Shadow Rocker and Royal Ravens, who were complete non-factors. But man, the Seattle team just like really struggled at creating first bloods. That was really their biggest issue as a team, because when they were 4v3, they did have a lot of discipline to win rounds. But like, if Pred died early in the round, if Mac died early in the round with their comp, they really struggled to like work their ARs to really work bloods in those situations, or even up trades. And so subsequently, they really struggled on maps like Asilo, on maps like Embassy, where they couldn't really get an advantage in those. And I mean, I could also bring up sort of the other issue, which is they would get the bomb down on offense, and they were, kind of middle of the road at kind of winning those rounds. I think to be an elite team, 64% is not bad. I just don't think it's good enough that they were really going to overcome the differences in S&D skill from some of the other elite squads. So just we're really executing their tactics well. I think the other problem too that this team kind of had is they just sort of kind of lived and died by the sort of having an auto veto in multiple game modes. You see that they were actually really good at Mercado at the beginning of the season, and they had a bad split at stage 2 on it, and they did not play Mercado hardpoint the rest of the year. And then the other issue is they were terrible at Mercado S&D at the beginning of the year. And then as you see here, they played it once in stage 2 and then didn't play it again, and then played it at stage 5 and they were terrible at it. And they finally played it at Champs, but I just think the team dealt with 2 auto vetoes throughout most of the year, and not playing Fortress at all and being terrible at Hotel. Like, the vetoes didn't help this team, and they were just never a factor most of the season. So there's not really any point really going through, I think, these stats, because again, this team is like completely different from last season. All of that is basically irrelevant to the squad. So what do I think about the moves? Well, first off, Abuza, love that. I think I've been very impressed with his English, how well that he's adapted when I watch him stream like BPL. I think this was a great pickup from Seattle. I know they have him running a sub, and I was someone that was a little bit critical, like coming in when I first saw this team of like, Abuza's going to be their second sub. I don't know. I think he's going to be fine. I think he's going to be a rookie of the year this year. I think they have found a cornerstone player once again in Seattle. Another player bringing over outside of NA. I think Abuza is going to be like him this season. The rest of the team, though, I have some questions. All right, first off, we start with Alec. And, he obviously had a really good run with Atlanta FaZe and, his boys in Cold War. And then they just didn't like really convert any wins in Vanguard. And then last year was probably the worst season that he's had as a pro. Like, I'm being straight up. Individually, his individual performance was not good. As a team performance, they were terrible at every single event last year. And I think that's probably the lowest point he's ever been in his career. And so now he's really getting another chance here on the Seattle team to really be that kind of leader that was expected of him when he was on the Atlanta FaZe, and then he kind of stopped doing the last couple of years. So this is a huge chance for him to really convert on that and kind of make a comeback. I'm just concerned that, looking at the rest of this team, and we kind of move on to talk about Illy, that I think either him or Alec isn't going to make it throughout the rest of this year, because I have questions about Illy too. He's another player making a comeback, another a player who again had a good start to his Vanguard season and then had a hand injury, and then last year played solid and then got dropped and then didn't play challengers all year. So I don't know what's going on with his hand and all that stuff. Supposedly he's healthy now. He hasn't really talked about it, but hand injuries are finicky, and I would always be concerned that, those issues could resurface. That being said, I think one thing that Inder will bring to this team, and really Alec too as well, is I just think this team should be better in S&D with paper with their squad than last year. So you should see an improvement in that game mode. But I just think once teams kind of all sort of know how to play the game, I'm just worried that the Inder Alec thing isn't going to work. And one of them, unfortunately, may get dropped for a player who's playing well in challengers. So I'm kind of keeping my eye on that, because I'd be very surprised if they both make it throughout the year. And look, I like Hook. I think that's really the best of the remaining sub options they could have picked up. You got to remember that Rambo is someone that knows Hook well and has kind of coached him to an online major championship and a bunch of event wins, blah, blah, blah. But, we know Kyler's shortcomings as a player. He's obviously, got a lot of skill and talent, but decision-making sometimes and continued repeated making the same mistakes over and over is an issue. So I have seen a decent amount of the Seattle team play, and they're actually in a decent spot right now as a team. I actually think that they are ahead of some squads. And so for some of the issues and questions I've highlighted, I do think they're going to paper over them early in the year. But I think, unfortunately, as the year goes on, these issues are going to surface. And I do not really foresee Seattle being able to answer in a positive all of those questions. So I do think this is not the team they're going to finish with. But I do think they do have a potential to surface, just like we talked about with Thieves, 1 or 2 players they can build upon for next season to really go from what I think where's they're going to net this year, being like a top 6, top 8 team, to being a contender next season if they play their cards right. So just like Seattle, or just like Thieves rather, they actually don't have a very easy schedule to split. So we already talked about the Thieves matchup. They will also play Boston at that opening weekend. So I expect Seattle to be 1-1 or 2-0 off the start. And then they play Optic and FaZe back-to-back on back-to-back days, which is, I think, a grueling. That being said, I actually think that this match, if you are someone who bets, I think you might get some good value here, because this is one of those like emotional matches where for Seattle, pretty much everybody on the team, other than Abuza, has an axe to grind with Optic. Like, I'm being dead serious. The coach got dropped from Optic last year. Illy got dropped. Kyler got dropped. Alec was supposed to go to the team and didn't go to the team. Like, all of them have some motivation here. So I think I could see that series potentially going in Seattle's favor. I don't think they're going to be FaZe. I think FaZe, this is like sort of the issue that good S&D teams have had against FaZe. It's like, I just think in the respawns, they're just not going to be able to catch up. And I think FaZe will do that. So, but I do think Seattle, when you look at these 4 matches, as hard as the schedule is, and I think they are far ahead, I think they have a good chance of being 2-2 here. And then they get to the back end of their set. I think this Toronto match is a huge bonus match. If they win this, I think there's a good chance that Seattle get a top seed going into the Boston Major. But if they lose this Toronto match, they have a must win against Miami. I think that they'll probably convert. And then this Minnesota match could be really big for both teams seeding, either to make it to winners or get a plus matchup. Minnesota's a team I haven't seen play a lot, so I don't really know how good they are, but if they're good, this one could be a little dicey. One of the last matches of the weekend, one of the matches is on Saturday. So very interesting set here for Seattle. I don't think this is very easy. They played 3 of the top 4 teams, and they play a bunch of other teams that are around that top 6, top 8 range, and they only really have one like match in Miami that I think they should definitively outclass the other team. Tough sledding potentially for Seattle. And that's really my assessment. Is I think they do need to get far ahead because of how hard this schedule is and because of their team. Like, I just think if with this team comp, if they don't get off to a good start, I think it's going to crumble very quickly. And they are going to be one of the teams making very early changes. I do think that they have benefited from this meta not being very sub heavy, which plays into the hands of sort of the pickups they've made. So kind of kudos to that, I guess. But I just don't think this roster is going to stick it all season. And I do think they're going to be fighting for that kind of 6th, 7th, 8th spot throughout most of the year. I do think with some of the experience they have, I think they should have a good chance at making champs. But I do think it's going to come down to the final event for the squad. And again, I just don't know if there's going to be the roster that makes it to the end of the year. But the Abuza pickup is really good. I think they got him for a couple of years. And maybe they figure out Ilya or Alec, and one of them has a really good comeback season. I would be rooting for those guys to figure it out because I love those guys. They're great personalities, the type of people we love in the CDL that, you know, really get into the marketing and the fun of it. And I would love to see those guys rebound from the last couple of tough years they've had. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Seattle and LA Thieves. 2 teams that are completely rebuilding, 2 teams that I think are not going to be championship contenders this season. They may get off to good starts, but they have hard Major 1 schedules, Major 1 qualifier schedules for both. They're some of the hardest that teams have. They both might have a tricky start to the season. For Thieves, I think they have more about them to really deal with the adversity to start of the season. I just think the Seattle team on paper, if they don't have a good start, I think they're going to crumble. So let me know in the comments what you guys think. Like if you enjoyed. Subscribe for more. Coming up the next couple of videos, we're going to talk about some of the fringe top 6, top 8 teams and some of the teams I think might be in the bottom of the league this season. So be on the lookout for that. And as always, guys, we will see you on the next one.